Hello, my name is Rachel Pontier, and you are listening to Equip Tracks, a discipleship podcast from City Church Manchester. Our goal with every episode is to encourage and equip the church as we engage with a variety of topics that impact our life as a Christian. In this episode, I am joined by Tulela Pea and Josh Foulkes to talk about friendship and how it shapes and impacts our experience in the church. Thanks for listening. Let's dive in. My name is Rachel Pontier, and welcome to Equip Tracks. We are starting a new series talking about friendship, and I am joined by my good friends, Tulela Pea. Pea?
Yes.
I guess we're not that good of friends. Pea, I've been saying P the whole time.
Many people do.
Well, it is, in my defense,
it is
spelled.
English. I don't blame them.
I don't know if I've ever heard.
It's in my language, like my ethnic language.
Which is?
Oshiwambo.
Okay. Pea. All right.
That's lovely.
I won't get it wrong again. And Josh Foulkes?
You butchered it less than some people do. Foulkes is a very, I think, a long-standing English name, but nobody can say it.
Does it mean something?
I have no idea.
They say folks. Maybe they say folks.
They say folks a lot, yeah.
Folks. Which is, it's a good folksy. I mean, that's kind of...
It's derived from Fawkes, like Guy Fawkes.
Oh.
So that's the...
But his was spelled with an A?
A-W-K-E-S.
And you're
O-U-L-K-E-S.
Okay.
We're learning a lot.
We are learning a lot. We're
Opening
way better
minute.
friends now than we were when we started. This is really encouraging. Well, like I said, we are starting a new series on relationships. And the first relationship we like to talk about is friendship. And I think friendship is one of those relationships that we all have done for our whole life, like from the primary school playground to adulthood. Like it's something that encompasses our whole life, but we don't often talk about how to do friendship well. We sort of assume a lot of knowledge. And so my hope here today is for us to look at scripture, look at Christ, see how he does friendship. And with that as our starting block, build out, okay, how does this look in our modern times and in the church, in Manchester, in a city center? So that's the goal for today. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's dive in. First off, before we jump in, Tulela Pea,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about who you are and sort of your experience of friendship.
Yeah, hello. My name's Tulela, as said. I am 26 years old. I think that will be helpful to know. Been in Manchester for almost 3 years now. Regular member at City Church. My experience of friendship. I grew up in another country. I'm from another country. So, yeah, I think my cultural background has a lot to do with how I view approaching friends, making friends, who my friends can be. I've always been quite open to different people, not being confined to a single friend group, which has caused sometimes some awkward gatherings with different worlds colliding. But yeah, served me well today.
Yeah, great. Josh, what about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with friendship.
Sure, yeah. So I'm 34 years old. I'm married and I have 3 kids. I've been in Manchester for about 12 years now since leaving university. My experience of friendship, I guess, has changed over the years. I grew up with a very strong group of friends through the church that I went to. And then I went to university, and I guess during a time where I somewhat drifted away from my faith, I very much made a different set of friends, non-Christian friends. And then post-university, and actually in God's goodness, rediscovering his love for me and a desire to live out my faith, found myself rebuilding good Christian friendships at City Church in a church plant context. And those friendships have grown and changed, and people have moved on over time. And it's definitely different now that I'm a married man with kids than it was when I was kind of younger and unencumbered and much more foolish. But yeah, it's been a really interesting experience, and there's a lot to navigate in the topic.
Yeah, thanks. Well, like I said, my name is Rachel Pontier, or Ponch, to many at City Church, and I am 43. I am not from Manchester. I'm from the U.S.
Oh.
I know. Shocking. I know. We're learning so much about each other. And my experience of friendship it's been varied, but it's also been pretty consistent. I've had one friend who I've had pretty much my whole life. We met when we were 3. We became friends when I was in grade 6, which is about 12 years old. And we've been good friends ever since. But through the years and the places that I've lived, because I've lived all over the world now, I have grown friendships and been able to maintain friendships over long distance. And so that's been a big part of my story. Yeah, I think, and then in high school, I played sports, but hung out with the nerds. And so I was able to bridge those gaps. And so I think a big part of my story in friendship is being able to bridge gaps and build connections. But like I said, we're gonna look at first what Jesus says about friendship and how he does friendship. And the passage that I'd like us to look at first is John 15. In the context of this, he has chosen his disciples. He's lived with his disciples. He's worked with his disciples for a couple of years at this point. And here in John 15, he says this to them. He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." So here we have Jesus, their rabbi, who is their superior in a sense, but he is coming to them and he's calling them friends, and he's telling them to love one another, and he is revealing things about himself and about what he's come to do, and he's calling them friends. And so I'm curious, what hallmarks of friendship do you see Jesus sort of exhibiting here and sort of implicitly calling us to?
Well, I don't know if you've heard the joke. Jesus' greatest miracle was maintaining a close group of 12 friends throughout his ministry.
I love that quote. Yeah, it's so good.
But I think
male friends
particularly, yeah, it's something to aspire to. But I mean, Jesus is, I guess, benchmark for what good friendship is really high, and obviously he is the ultimate example. So, we see how that Jesus for the believer is the greatest friend that we will ever have, and he's also a greater friend to us than we can ever be to him, which I think is really interesting. But you can tell in this passage that the central theme of friendship is loving one another, and not just loving one another, but a really clear commandment: love one another as I have loved you. And there seems to be kind of an implicit idea that if we love Jesus, therefore then we will love one another as friends. And I think it's a really high bar, and I think it's one that we're never going to be able to do perfectly, but it's one that we are commanded to do as well, which I think is really interesting in this verse. It's a commandment. It's not just a suggestion. So exploring that idea of kind of love being the basis of a friendship, and how do we love one another well, like using Jesus as the example, I guess, is probably the starting point.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really foundational there too, is that it's God's love for us that motivates our love for others. One of my professors in seminary, he would always say that God doesn't ask us to do something that he has not already done for us and enables us to do. And so here, God has loved us through Christ. Christ has loved them. And so now he's saying, I've loved you. Now go and love others the way that I have loved you, out of the love that I have given you. And he's shown them how to do it. He's done it for them. And then by his Holy Spirit, he gives them the ability to do it as well. And so, yeah, when we're talking about friendship and the way that we interact with others, it has to start from something not within ourselves, but outside of ourselves. God's love for us actually is the fuel and the motivation for us then to look to the other and prioritize them.
It's really interesting if you look at the actual conversation and the participants in that conversation. Jesus is talking to his disciples, who are ultimately a bunch of ragtag fishermen, tax collectors, some of them who are really outspoken and zealous, others who, most of them have got pasts which are really interesting, but I'm sure a very different mix of personalities. And Jesus just makes kind of a really bold statement: you are my friends.
Yeah.
And we know that Jesus didn't choose his friends because that person has this shared interest, or that person and I, we had a great chat about, that thing that we can kind of build a friendship. It's a choice that Jesus made to be friends with these people, knowing that they all come from very different backgrounds and different places. But it's that active choice to, I love you. You are my friends.
It's so interesting how the gospel, so the good news of Jesus dying, rescuing us, redeeming us, involves friendship. That we were once enemies and we are now befriended by God. That we are invited into this relationship, which really points to kind of what you were saying earlier, Rach, about how we often discount friendship like it's just some second-rate relationship.
Yeah.
Especially in the church setting, we might think, oh, marriage, that's the thing, that's the relationship to pursue. But actually the gospel begins with friends.
Yeah.
It begins, we see that in the garden, the man and God walking in the garden, the Lord befriending us and then redeeming that through his son. And so it's so significant as well that friendship is marked by sacrifice. And I think it comes again to this idea that friendship doesn't require sacrifice. The kind of love that Jesus is talking about that we see in verse 13, the greater love is no one than this, that someone lay his life down for his friends. Yeah, I think that's quite significant to die for your friends. That's huge.
Yeah.
And it sets a bar of what kind of love, because I think sometimes I think the quality of love we have in mind from our own cultural perspective compared to what the gospel puts forth of what kind of love we've been loved with and therefore to love others with, they're completely separate.
Yeah. Something that's interesting that kind of dovetails into that is a few chapters later in John 17, we have Jesus praying the high priestly prayer, as it's called, where he is asking the Father to glorify him, to protect the disciples. And then there's a section in there where he prays that the church would be one. And he wants the church universal. So not just his disciples, but those who have not yet been born. Jesus is praying for all these groups of people. And he prays that they would be one as he and the Father are one. And it's really interesting when you start thinking about that. I think when we often use that language of, oh, they will be one, we first think of marriage, right? Like, one flesh. There's the sacrificial one fleshness. They are one. Yeah. And that is reserved for marriage. But Jesus isn't praying that. No. Jesus is praying that the church would be one. And it has to mean more than just theological unity and agreement, because he's praying that they would be one as the Father and the Son are one. And there is theological unity among the Father and the Son, but there is also a relationship that is deep and committed and together. And so it's really interesting thinking about the church being one. We sometimes think like, oh, we're a united church because we all want the same things. And we get together and there isn't any discord among us. So we're, but it's something deeper and richer that is being asked and prayed for in that prayer. And I think we tend to put friendship on a very superficial level. Yeah. And Jesus here is saying, no, not just the married people, but everybody, the young, the old, the single, the married, like we want you all to be one. And sort of like practically playing that out. I was listening to something recently where they were talking about a married couple at a doctor's office, and the husband was giving his medical history and his wife is sitting right next to him. And he said something to the effect of like, oh, and then I had my appendix out. And she's like, no, dear, I had my appendix out. To the husband, it's like what happens to his wife happened to him. And that's what like being one looks like in that marriage. And so when Jesus is praying that we be one, there is an aspect of what happens to our brother, what happens to our sister should impact us to a degree that we feel it. When they are grieving, we should grieve. When they are rejoicing, we should rejoice with them, as if like we can celebrate as if it happened to us, or we could grieve as if it happened to us. And that, I think, is a level of friendship that we rarely see in the church. And we sort of reserve for best friends category rather than the people that we see and interact and worship with on a regular basis. Again, a super high bar that Jesus is calling us towards, but one that I think is something to keep reaching for.
Yeah, and we see that even here in talking about like, I've called you friends, for all that I have heard, I have made known to you. I'm bringing you in. Servants don't know what their masters are doing. So even that standard of friendship, that this is about equality, like putting someone on this almost equal footing as you, that I'm looking at you face to face and esteeming you greatly. This is the king. And he says, you're my friend. So that breaks lots of barriers and hierarchy. And brings people in to see something so deep and intimate, like you're saying. And yeah, I think where for friendship sits, it sits in the superficial sense. Yet we yearn for that deep unity that is more than just agreeing, but actually we bond, we enjoy one another's company, and we lean on one another.
Yeah.
I think the complexity sometimes comes in the conversation when we think, well, how do we live that out in a church where, let's say there's 200 people in the service that I go to. I mean, what's the expectation on me then to love everybody well? Like, do I have the capacity to be able to have this like radical openness with everybody? Should I have that with everybody? I was thinking, it's interesting to know Jesus, seems to have those different levels of closeness with people. So you've got, yes, the 12 disciples here in the passage. Then you've got kind of like the inner circle as well. So like the Peter, James, and John, who often go in the most intimate moments. Beyond the 12, you have mention of like the 72 as well.
Yeah.
So there seems to be this recognition from Jesus that in our kind of current human capacity, we do only have we have a limitation on the number of quality relationships that we can actually have. And I think that's probably where maybe a lot of the struggle comes in for people. Like who are the people that I have a close, and then you throw in the complexities of working in a busy job, of kind of your own family that you have those relationships with. And that's when I think people really find it tricky to translate this, which everybody, you said, yearns for and longs for. But then how do we make that kind of practical, and how do we live that out effectively in a world where there's so many different things trying to attract our attention?
Yeah. I think one thing that I see in this John 15 verse as well is just Jesus's friendship actually includes rather than excludes. And so what he's like, we're friends to his disciples. He's like looking at like, okay, we're friends. Now, like, not turn your back to me, but like, I think the image that comes to mind is Jesus and his disciples kind of shoulder to shoulder, but facing outward. And so it's like, now go look and love other people the way that we have loved one another. It won't diminish what we have, but actually it will open it up. And C.S. Lewis talks about this in a lot of his books, where his friendships with others are meant to be shoulder to shoulder, and actually bringing more people in enhances the friendship you have with the person that you're with. And it shouldn't diminish. And I think when we find ourselves in situations where we're trying to be possessive of friendships, or we're getting jealous or envious of various things, that should be a warning flag in our minds of, okay, I'm not actually engaging this well. If friendship is meant to include rather than exclude, how am I either clinging too tightly to this person, or how am I not loving well? Because Jesus here is actually asking them to go out and love other people, not just each other. He's not like turning to each other, okay, y'all are best friends now. And so just like keep in contact with each other and don't ever let this go. He's like, no, go out, love others the way that I have loved you. And he's giving an example to live by. It's includes rather than excludes. And so I think in the context of a church, like you're talking about, Josh, I think when we walk into those spaces, there may be people that we want to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
But I think there is a level to which we should always be trying to bring more people in, not to diminish what you have, but to actually grow what you have. It should be looking to multiply it rather than just build a protective wall around my friendships. And I don't need any more and I don't want any more. And it's not something that we're going to do well, obviously, with 200 people. That's really hard. And when like a church like us, we have 2 services and everyone is so different. Like it's going to take time. Yeah. This isn't something that happens with a snap of our fingers. This is something that takes time and work. And hopefully we'll get into some practical ways to start friendships and grow friendships and maintain friendships as we go on. But yeah, just kind of observing that Jesus is calling us to include rather than exclude in our relationships.
And I think that's a really helpful image, Josh, because I drew myself almost concentric circles when I was thinking about that of, really the Father being at the center of that circle for Jesus as the primary person he'd have deep communion fellowship with, to then the 3 and then the 12 and then the 72, and we throw in Martha and Mary and Lazarus somewhere in there, and then the other disciples that people would have healed and spoken to in different towns. Like there's so many circles to that. But I guess what might help us in such a big church context is getting at the center of who our first friend is. Our first friend is Jesus, the one who first loved us, and then we can love. And I think we're only going to be as good a friend if we know our true friend.
Yeah.
If we actually receive his friendship toward us and pour into new friends, into old friends. From that place of friendship, the Lord is making known to them what he knows from the Father. So it's just that almost like a relay, like giving what I was given. So I think, sometimes we burn out and we're overwhelmed or we're frustrated.
Yeah.
Because we're not actually even just appreciating. We don't really see God in those terms of friend. We understand him as king and priest and prophet and master and Lord. I don't know in our church context whether we really fully appreciate and sit in the truth of a friend. We have those songs of what a friend we have in Jesus and what a friend we do have.
Yeah. And I think as you're talking to, I think what's important there is a security and a confidence in your relationship with Christ is going to enable you. The image, again, I think in images a lot is a river, it comes from the source and it just flows out. And like when our source is secure, when it's full, when it's never going to run out, like then we're able to sort of include others and bring people along. But I think where we often struggle in friendship is when we're not secure in that source.
No.
And we feel like the Lord either doesn't like us, doesn't love us. And when that becomes insecure, when that relationship becomes insecure, it does greatly impact our relationships within the church. And then that's where we're like, all right, I don't feel secure in Christ. And so I'm going to latch onto this person because they make me feel good. But then now, oh no, they've gotten to know somebody else. And now I'm jealous, like there's a jealous. And so this is where I think a lot of problems can grow from. And so it is so vital to have that secure source of friendship so that we can be free to go out and love others as Christ has loved us.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, to you see, and I often find myself in a situation where I don't have more to give, or I feel like I'm struggling to love others, and it's kind of you think of Jesus and the Samaritan woman, encouraging you to draw from the well that gives eternal life, and if you're not constantly drawing from the well of that friendship with Jesus, when you try and pour out friendship to others, if you're not drawing from that well, then you're going to run dry. And
Yeah.
actually, it's no wonder you've got nothing to give. But you got to realize you're not the source of love. You're not the source
Yeah.
of good friendship. Actually, that comes ultimately from, as you've rightly said there, our relationship with Jesus. So it's just a really helpful reminder, isn't it? The more we go back, remind ourselves, dwell, really enjoy that friendship that we have in Jesus, the more we are able to go and to pour that out to others. But we can't do it if actually that part of our life isn't where it should be.
You know, Josh, you were talking about a big church and what does that practically look like when we walk into a room of 200 people? Am I supposed to be best friends with everybody?
Yeah.
Another C.S. Lewis quote that I love is one in the Four Loves, where he says, "For the Christian, there are strictly speaking no chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to his disciples, 'You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you,' can truly say to every group of Christian friends, 'You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another.' The friendship is not a reward for our discriminating and good taste in finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each of us the beauties of the others." And I love that quote because I think if you find yourself at a church or a member of a church, hopefully you're a member of a church. If not, become a member of a church. It's really important. Sometimes we're like, well, there's nobody here like me. And so I don't think I can find friends here, or this is too hard. And I think the thing I love about this quote is that God doesn't sort of he doesn't make accidents. He doesn't, it's not by chance. Like, there is a secret master of ceremonies at work. And so rather than walking into a space and being like, is there anybody here that likes me or that I like? But asking, all right, Lord, you have placed me here. Who's here for me to be a friend to? Like, going in with expectancy rather than this sort of consumer relationship of, this is all about me. I need people to like me. I need, but actually walking into those rooms and those spaces and groups of people, asking, who can I love? Who have you placed here, Lord? Because I know this is not an accident. What story can I hear? What question can I ask to help develop a friendship or get to know somebody better? Because I know that this is not an accident.
But I guess that points a lot to our culture. It's what our culture says about friendship. That our culture is quite consumeristic. It's also utility driven. What do you have to offer me? Friends, compared to this biblical image that we've just kind of looked at briefly, that it's quite unique and intimate and rich and close and love driven for the sake of the flourishing of one another. Friends in the world's context is actually a tool. It's something you can use either for your benefit in the sense of your well-being, making you feel better, or even when we talk about networking, making friends in high places to actually elevate your own purpose, like your career or whatever the case is, which then I think that posture that like you're talking about, when we go into a room, we end up asking the wrong questions in the first instance. I think those things that our needs, our careers, those things matter, but they're not the most important thing often when we're getting to know someone, or they shouldn't be. So yeah, I think it bends our hearts, but of course that's sin.
How might we sort of differentiate between a biblical definition of friendship and a worldly definition of friendship? What would be the main differences between those two? We've already talked about love and sort of the sacrificial aspect of friendship that Jesus sort of lays out. And you've mentioned a bit of like the consumer side of friendship, but as we're thinking about definitions, what might be some big differences?
I think convenience is a big one. Is this a convenient friendship for me? And, the utility, does it serve a purpose? And I guess willingness to sacrifice, it's a really clear point that Jesus emphasizes here. But I think outside of that, outside of the church, in the Christian context, the question would probably, well, why should I do that thing that someone's asked me to do? And actually that inconveniences me. and that puts me at a disadvantage. Therefore, I'm going to exercise my right to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think that's something that we really don't want to have, that perspective of believers, because actually, we look at Jesus' example and we want to sacrifice. We're willing to be put out for other people in order to love them well. And that's an aspect I think I probably see in non-Christian friendships that maybe is probably one of the main things that isn't a feature of those friendships.
I think what should distinguish Christian friendships and friendships in the world, I think friendships in the world are based on reciprocity. That's not grace. Grace gives without condition. I'm bestowing blessing on you, not because you deserve it or earned it, but because love. So I think there's a transaction that happens in the world that, well, because we maybe like the same thing, we can trade our friendship time together. In the moment that shared thing goes, actually there's no buy-in. You're not serving me, I'm putting in more than I'm getting. This friendship should end. So I think there's a perception of reciprocity, compatibility. This is what we see in the word, particularly the seemingly incompatible people being friends. So yeah, I don't know. That's not really quite concise definitions we're getting at, but we're feeling it through.
I think, yeah, I know. And I don't think we're going to get to like a textbook.
Yes.
A textbook definition here. But I think it's helpful just to kind of talk through. I guess one of the things that I heard you say was this commonality. And once that commonality goes away, then the friendship goes away.
The tendency can be to maybe do non-Christian friendships a disservice as well, and we don't want to do that, because I know people who actually probably really care about each other as friends. They're not Christians, and they stick by each other through thick and thin.
Yeah.
So I think, and the more I think about it, the more I think, well, what is the thing that defines a Christian friendship versus a non-Christian friendship, and like what is the difference between me as a Christian who says I love you as a friend, and maybe a non-Christian who says I love this person as a friend.
Right.
And I think I keep coming down to is, when I say I love you as a friend, my ultimate concern is your eternal spiritual well-being. And a non-Christian cannot say that to another non-Christian. And actually that concern and love that I have for you as a child of God and your relationship with God means that I'll have difficult conversations with you about the way that you live your life that I don't think is conducive to you having a healthy relationship with God. And I want you to have, as a friend, difficult conversations with me if you see that my relationship with Christ isn't a priority. And actually, I'll have loads of friends that I love playing football with, or playing golf, or doing stupid things with. But ultimately, underneath all that, I want those Christian friends to be concerned mostly about, am I walking with Christ? Am I healthy in my walk with God? And that means I will challenge them. I will have those difficult things, but we have that kind of unifying, underlying reality that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, and actually our bond, it's not going to just last for this life. It is going to last for eternity. And that means we can really disagree now, but we can't escape each other. We could ignore each other for the next 20 years because we're both believers. We're going to spend the rest of eternity together, so we might as well try and do a good job of it now. Whereas if you're not a Christian, you might love people so well, but actually your kind of primary responsibility or your primary concern is, are they happy in the here and now? Are they living their best life in the here and now? And I think because we as believers have that eternal perspective, it shifts the level of vulnerability that we should have with one another to the really deeper level stuff where I'm okay with you talking to me about this because I know that your primary concern is my eternal well-being, not just my well-being in this life.
That is great.
That was well said.
That's like discipleship.
And I think too, then that means that the difficult conversation that you have may put a bend in the friendship or the relationship that might last a few years, but there is a patience and a stick-with-itness, a steadfastness
yes,
at work because of the source as well. because if our source is steadfast and faithful and is willing to say no for the sake of our soul, then it means that we then can say no to our friendships for the sake of their soul. Say no in the context of friendship. So not giving, like you said, not giving them stuff that's going to make them happy in the here and now, but actually this is going to be better for our relationship, because I want you to know the Lord, and actually want you to know the Lord more than I want you to like me.
And I think that comes at part of our own cultural, really, I think that's probably a sin issue, our lack of tolerance for being called out, particularly now in this generation. There's a sense in which people are so afraid either to make mistakes or just so afraid to hear what's actually true about them, that, hey, you have an attitude or you have a problem, you have X. There's a sense of which, well, they're just toxic. They don't have your best interests at heart. But actually the job of a friend, painted particularly in the word, is to be an iron sharpener. Friends are meant to add friction to your life. They're actually meant to cut you. There's this verse in Proverbs that talks about faithful are the wounds of a friend. I think that's Proverbs 13:20. Versus the kisses of an enemy are profuse. There's, of course, iron sharpens iron. There's, just earlier in John 15, we have the Lord talking about the vine dresser pruning the branch that's bearing fruit. Like, you're doing great and you're cutting me. Why? I think we really miss out on what the purpose of a friend is supposed to be. It's not just for good times. It's not just to uplift you and to build you up in faith, which is something the Bible's so rich about, particularly the New Testament, about it being an exhorter, encouraging. But actually, we're also meant to challenge, and we're meant to come against. We're meant to scrutinize, not with the purpose of condemning you and just cutting you down, but for the sake of building you up.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Proverbs 27:6.
Praise God.
But Proverbs 13:20 says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm.
There we go. Which
both apply
true.
to friendship.
Yes. Because friends are people of influence. So I think we need to be quite intentional about who we choose to befriend us.
That's a great segue.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's segue to the different ways in which we can make friends. So I'd like us to talk briefly about how we find friends. What does it look like to start a friendship? And then kind of move on to how do we grow that friendship? How do we maintain it? And then maybe talk about briefly, what does it look like to end a friendship? Is there ever a time when we should end a friendship in this life? We've just talked about if it's with a Christian, we know we're going to be with them in eternity. But I think there maybe are some times where we need to say goodbye until we see each other in the new heavens and the new earth and we're perfected. So I'm just curious, how do you guys go about starting friendships?
I think the start's the hard part that everyone's nervous about, right? It's a, because you might meet people, and I guess there's an element of vulnerability from the start. If you want to be friends with someone, you have to spend time with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, first of all, if you're an individual who is super busy all the time and fills, with work, with everything else, and you don't have time for friends, I think the first thing that you can do is to think, okay, well, where can I make space in my diary to start building some of those relationships? Because that's the first step to making friends.
Yeah.
And I think once you have that space, being willing to put yourself out there a little bit, I think is, there's a vulnerability to making friendships, so that we don't like vulnerability in our society, but that's the reality. Jesus showed vulnerability throughout all his friendships, and he had Jesus kind of approaches some of his disciples and he kind of just approaches them out of the blue and says, come on, follow me.
Yeah.
And obviously we're not Jesus. It's important to say that.
Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. But you need to have an element where you're willing to say to somebody, would you like to spend some time together? And I think that's a starting point, being willing to say that. Not necessarily just expecting that someone will come and say that to you. And they might do, and that's great. But, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think approaching is ultimately the first step. Approaching someone, and that might be in a group setting where it feels safer. People might be mingling about. Now, of course, that's dependent on the nature of that group. Some groups you observe and they look quite cliquey, and so you might not be encouraged to actually approach them. But that, once again, that picture is really helpful of being shoulder to shoulder. If it's a group talking that actually seeks to include, then someone might be more inclined to join.
Yeah. One thing that I've found helpful is being a collector of questions, and essentially asking good questions of people. Because I think we tend to sometimes, if we enter a room and it's full of people, I get this. I mean, you guys know me. I get shy. I get sort of like school lunchroom syndrome, where I'm like holding the tray being like, I don't know where to sit. This is too overwhelming. Like, I don't know anybody. And it takes this like, okay, just go sit down, ask some questions, get to know people. And not just what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? Those are fine questions, but we can be more creative than that. We can ask questions like, what do you enjoy about your job? Because then you're going to hear what they do and you're going to hear what they enjoy about it. And then now you're asking them not just facts, but you're asking them about their personality. You're going to discover things along the way. Even just asking questions like, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up there? We can ask really good questions that help draw somebody else out. And then the hope then is that is reciprocated. But I think when we enter into a space and we just stand there and hope somebody will come up and talk to us, that is not loving the other.
No.
That is waiting to be loved. And I think that's where that we find that tension. And so there is a vulnerability. There is a boldness. And I think, to your point, Tulela, as well, there is a way that others can see and observe and pull along as well. Those who maybe are not as good at being vulnerable or good at sort of initiating those conversations. I had a friend. I do have a friend. I knew her sort of tangentially, and I was a bit intimidated by her. And I was out at lunch with her and a few other people after a Bible study, and we were chatting about what it looks like to be a friend. 2 of them were married, 2 of us were single, and we're just chatting about that and how we do friendship in the church. And she said, "Oh, I usually pick one person out and go after them." And then she looked at me, she's like, "That's what I'm doing to you right now." And I was like,
great.
I was like, what? Huh? I didn't know.
Class.
And so then she like just boldly told me, and I was like, okay, yes, I will receive this pursual. We will be friends. And she is a dear friend to this day. Like, she just said, I like what I see in her. I've observed, and now I'm going to slowly sort of pursue, not unlike a dating relationship,
Come on,
but in friendship. And that her just being able to say that boldly then was like, oh, this is great. Yes, I would love to get to know her better. She is super intimidating, but now I see that that's just her personality. And it's been so fun to get to know her over the years. She's come and visited me here in Manchester as well. So she's a dear friend. But that starting a friendship can be really awkward, but it does take that vulnerability, good questions, pursuing, and like you were talking about in Proverbs, like choosing wisely. People who you're going to learn from and will help you grow. Not in a selfish, this is just feeding me consumeristic relationship, but in a way that like, oh, I want to learn from them.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said as well, just putting yourself in the situations where you are around other people. I think some of the ways that I make good friendships is like joining service teams in church, because you are naturally, particularly guys, I always found that we build relationships better, kind of side by side, doing the same thing and kind of chatting at the same time rather than face to face and having a coffee. And there's an element of social awkwardness which I think comes with everybody. So finding ways to get around that, but serving, having a common goal, and what better way to do that in service of Christ in the church, allows you to then more naturally just have those conversations, and just being in proximity, you have a reason, and then there's a way to build a relationship there. So it doesn't always have to be as intimidating as I'm going to go up and I'm naturally a really super awkward person, and I'm going to, there's an element of that, but I think putting yourself in those situations where you can get involved in that community of people that you're in is another good way to kind of start that process.
And I want to just quickly add to that when we go into the world, into whatever context that may be, whether that's work or university, I think taking note of what people are interested in, which I guess gets back to the idea of curiosity, and that love initiates and love takes interest in its object, basically. And so, yeah, whether that's the level of investment of, the people around me seem to be talking about this particular sport all the time, or this show. Now, I might not watch that show or sport, but I might go read just a bit on this thing just so I can contribute, to just show that, like, hey, I'm interested in your world, why this matters to you. And yeah, I think that's love.
Okay, so we've started a good friendship.
Right.
We've made a connection.
Right.
How do we grow the next stage down? Like, what does it look like to grow that friendship in a way that is loving and kind and healthy?
Time and patience are a big thing. Friendships often grow at different paces depending on who you are. But the minute you put pressure on the way that a friendship is growing, you already add an element of, I guess pressure on the other person who's maybe in that friendship to accelerate a relationship that maybe isn't ready to be accelerated. So I think having the persistence of saying, oh, I'd like to meet up, and let's make sure that we're talking together at a relatively frequent basis, but not trying to go too deep too fast, and actually seeing how things develop, and being prayerful about that in your own life and your own heart as well. But I think ultimately some of the best friendships that I've had, they blossom over time, and even maybe in like the first year of friendship, you could probably say, yeah, we're friends, but it's at the moment it's probably quite surface level. But then something happens maybe in life that actually you're able to support them in something, and they're able to support you in something, and it takes that friendship to a different level. And I think it's okay. I think what we're talking about, and what Jesus is saying and commanding his disciples. Yes, we can love one another really well, but it doesn't automatically mean that I'm going to give you the absolute kind of the keys to the deepest parts of my life and the thing that I feel. And there's that element of we need to trust one another, and trust only really grows over time in that space. So I think that's just really important.
And I would say too that I think depth comes one-to-one. I think it comes in smaller circles. So if we start friends in group settings, which I think it's quite easy to, you get along with these people and you guys go out and you do this particular thing and you keep hanging out in those settings. But I think depth, that kind of quality brotherly affection, really comes in more private settings. So that might be one or two people instead of the 10 that you usually hang out with. And once again, like Josh was saying, it takes time and a sustained, I think, effort from all those people involved to actually share more and more of themselves. And maybe it takes better questions just over a longer period of time of, why does that matter to you? And getting to the heart questions as opposed to just head questions.
Yeah. I think one thing in this sort of stage of friendship that I can see go well or go wrong is, and I am not a therapist, but so it's just the idea of attachment styles.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know that you are someone that struggles with trusting the security of a relationship when you are not communicating, like if you're the type of person that needs constant communication to know that you're okay, that's something to be aware of. Because, or if you're somebody that's like, I can go 2 months without talking to that person and I know we're still friends, I think those are the kinds of things that you need to be aware of in your own heart. Knowing your tendencies and being able to communicate those and having grace for the other person in the midst of their tendencies.
Yeah.
And so clear communication, trust, all of this and this stage, I feel like is helpful. Sometimes, you may have that sort of fremistry, as I like to call it, that friend chemistry immediately, and you're on the same wavelength, and it's like, we don't need to talk about it. Like, we just know we're fine. But sometimes you might need to talk about it, and that's not a bad thing. So yeah, I think clear communication, trust, and understanding your own tendencies in friendship. This middle aspect of friendship of what does it look like to be secure in the source and be able to be with one another and love one another in sort of the messy middle as we are kind of going all different kinds of places. All right, we've talked about the start, we've talked about the growth, the messy middle. As we think about friendships, is there ever a time for a friendship to end? And what would it look like to end a friendship well?
I think the first thing I want to say with that is to state the elephant in the room that I think we kind of got at, but maybe not really, is how Jesus was a friend of sinners, meaning he befriended failing people, weak, failing people, and loved them. And for some reason, particularly in the church, because when we claim Christ, we are Christians, we have this expectation, whether said or not, that Christians shouldn't fail us, that we are living to a higher standard, the standard of the gospel, therefore Christians should not hurt us particularly. So if the world fails me in friendship, the church should not, and when it does, it absolutely crushes us. So I think what we need to set a baseline for is, what do we do when friends fail? Because that's when we're talking about friends ending, something's gone wrong. And so we need to set the baseline that we are sinners, redeemed by grace, but on this side of glory, we are not perfect. And so we will fail one another and hurt one another. And so how do we navigate that? How do we deal with that? And then I think we can unpick the situations out of that where, oh, you are unrepentant about this, or you are living a life of sin that's actually not conducive. So I think a baseline needs to be set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a helpful distinction. We are going to hurt one another.
Yeah.
Whenever I move in with somebody different, which I've had a lot of roommates and housemates, as we're starting this journey of living together, I usually say, look, I am going to hurt your feelings at some point. I'm not going to try to do it intentionally, but I'm a sinner. And this could go horribly wrong. And just know that if you at any point are hurt by me and need to address it, please do. And I will commit the same to you. But we're not perfect. And so we're gonna have some issues. But because of Christ, we can work through these issues together. And so, yeah, setting that up as a baseline, I think, is really helpful. Yeah, as we kind of think about this failing in friendship, is there a time to just we should be hitting the pause button or hitting the eject button?
Yeah, I think it's important to maybe differentiate between some of those friendships which naturally where they peter out because they were good friendships for a time, and life happens, right? And like there are people as well, I mentioned people that I keep in contact with and I love from across the other side of the globe. There are the people who like I was good friends with for a while, and like life took over and we kind of went our separate ways, and I would never say, oh, I'm not that person's friend now. Like I wouldn't be so, but I would also say we don't have like an active friendship. Maybe like it's like a background thing that maybe could be picked up one day if we ever cross paths, and that's okay. So if you want to call that an end to a friendship, it might be. But I think in terms of friendships, maybe talking people within our church who we have been close with and friendly with. But something has happened and it's like, well, should we continue in that relationship? It's definitely tricky. I think one of the the kind of key relational things that the Apostle Paul picks up in 1 Corinthians is talking about unrepentance is, and it's the only time he really kind of picks up on kind of that relational breakup is if someone is living in unrepentant sin, and Paul says have nothing to do with them. And that's a really big kind of, obviously, bold statement, but it's a statement from Paul, it's in the Bible. And actually, if I have a friend who is living in unrepentant sin, has decided I'm going to make this choice, and if it is damaging to the gospel, if it casts out on Christ, like actually, I shouldn't be endorsing that person and their way of life by saying, oh, it's okay, I'm just going to kind of ignore this. Yes, plead with them. Yes, say, I really want to continue this relationship. But if there's more extreme elements of living in unrepentant sin that brings the gospel into disrepute, there is an element there where Paul's like, you don't have anything to do with these people. I think the process of getting to that point is obviously really tricky, and there's a lot of pleading, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of, well, actually, can we talk through things? But I guess that's the more extreme end of where I see a friendship needs to end when one party is just living in unrepentant sin, and yeah.
Particularly if the circumstance is such that the person, if you're willing to like, hey, here's the ways in which I think this is going wrong. Here's the things I'm willing to do to enter in, and they are unwilling, then it becomes a one-sided situation. And so I think in my experience, when someone pulls away from everything so much, then it's not so much an ending of a friendship, but more of like, I'm here. You are allowed to make your choices, and I can't stop you from making those choices. I've pled with you. I've put myself out there. I've tried to like pursue you and bring you back, but you're making your choices. And so I have to respect your decisions, and I'm here if you want to pick it back up. But until then, I think there is, a way to sort of honor both parties, honor the choices that they're making, even though you don't agree with them, but being like, you're allowed to do that. That is your prerogative. I wish it was different, and I'll be here if you ever want to talk about it. But I also understand that you need to step away at this point, and I'm going to respect your decision. And then being able to sort of say that and let it go. I don't know if I've done that super well in the past. I think it's so much easier just to sort of like fade into the bushes like Bart Simpson and just be like, all right, we're done. Wash my hands of this person. But yeah, how do we trying to find ways to honor both parties within the situation, recognize the differences, recognize the choices, and come to a place where we can sort of part ways, knowing that I'm going to be okay, praying that you're going to be okay in the midst of that.
And I think lots of that really returns to, do we trust the Lord is a friend to them? Do we trust that the Lord loves them? Because if he does, he will not rest until his work is complete. Yeah. And so there is an entrusting of our friend making a bad choice to the Lord. That, Lord, you are sovereign. You will work for their good. And so if I'm not part of that work, partnering with you, Jesus, actively, then so be it. But actually, in the meantime, those concentric circles where that person may have sat, so they might have been quite close to me, it just might mean they have to be restructured within that. So they might not fully disappear, as Bart Simpson does, but they might go to an outer layer that I ready to be drawn back in, should the Lord have that, or not. But yeah, I think returning to our core friend, to our true friend, with our friend issues, pray and ask the Lord to intervene on their behalf, I think takes that pressure off for us to maybe try and fix things that feel unfixable at that time. And to remember that ultimately, for as much as I might disagree and think that this is best for you, the Lord knows best. And a particular group of friends that comes to mind is Job's friends. They started off being encouraging to him and mourning with him, and then they didn't quite understand what the what the Lord was doing at that time. And Job didn't lose his friends, but the Lord brought him to actually pray for them, for their forgiveness, because they've sinned against the Lord. So, yeah.
As we kind of draw our conversation to a close here, are there any pro tips that you guys have for people who may be struggling to find friends or feel like they're not a very good friend to others? Maybe they feel lonely. Maybe this has been an area of hurt and shame in their life. What wisdom do you have to offer?
I think recognizing that friendships look different at different phases of life with different people, and not having a one-size-all expectation of this is what friendship has to look like. Going back to the source of who is my greatest friend, as Tulela really helpfully said, it's Jesus. And recognizing actually the one person who is going to be a constant throughout your life is Jesus. And other friendships may come and they may go. And that might hurt. But actually that's the reality of life, this side of glory. And so to a degree, that's okay. Because the one person who's always in your corner, the one person you can always rely on is Jesus, and he's not going anywhere. And actually using that as your kind of foundation and source to be willing to go out and to be vulnerable, to try and build friendships is really the only place that you can and should start.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a little book that I read every year, and in it, he's talking about community, and he says something to the effect of, people who love the idea of community will kill it, but people who love people will find community wherever they go. Mm-hmm. Josh, to your point of, we may have an expectation of, this is what it should look like. This is what I want. I want this kind of friend. And so I'm going to go out and try to force the issue. Mm-hmm. And we end up putting too much pressure and sort of crushing that. But people who just love people will find community wherever they go. And I think that would be my pro tip, is if you are someone who feels like it is difficult for you to make friends and find friends, my question would be, how are you loving others? And what kind of expectations are you putting on these friendships? Mm. And what might it look like for you to, rather than walk in with expectations, but walk in with expectancy of, what might the Lord do? Who might be here that the Lord would like me to talk to and encourage and love well? And kind of having that mindset of giving rather than taking or receiving, I think helps shift the habits of our heart to actually love others well.
And I would say something I'd like to leave people with is two things. One being how Jesus is known as the friend of sinners. He befriends failing people. We are failing people, and yet the Lord has taught us an unfailing love. And that second thing would be in 1 Corinthians 13, the infamous love chapter that often is used in marriage context. And actually it's in the context, Paul talking to the church of how they are to love one another, and the kind of love that he mentions, that it is patient and kind. That is the picture, that we are to go out with this unfailing love shown toward us from our master friend, Jesus, and love failing people, that they might see the hope of glory. Amen. So, yeah.
And I think, too, that is something you both just touched on, this idea of eternity and having that in our mindset, and to be so captivated by the joy that is to come, and that the best is yet to come, knowing that this world, things are temporary and they fail and they break, but we are headed towards a place where nothing will fail, nothing will break, and we will be with our friend Jesus for all eternity and get to overflow that love to everyone around us.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Really appreciate your insight and input and wisdom. You guys are awesome. But for now, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Equip Tracks. Stay tuned for more episodes in this series as we discuss the topics of dating, marriage, and parenting. But for now, Thanks for joining us.